Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming here today. I'm Chad Lopez, president of WABC Radio. We're really excited about today. It's Greek Independence Day as we're celebrating it. And our president, CEO, John Catsimatidis, is here standing next to me to open the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad, and you and your team do a great job for WABC at WABCRadio.tv, and we're here to celebrate Greek Independence Day today, a subject close to my heart because I'm an American, but I respect my father, my mother, my grandfathers, my grandmother, and my forefathers. And that's what it's all about. And New York is the greatest place in the world. It has 185 countries. And guess what? We want to bring them all together, and that's what it's all about. Thank you, and God bless Greece, and God bless America. Thank you so much. Let's sit down here. And Father Alex, would you, because of my eye problem, would you describe to everybody that's at the table, or Lou Katsos, our chairman?
Thank you all for coming here today. We are proud to have here with us today Lou Katsos, who's our Grand Marshal for Greek Independence Day.
So, if I may, it's really a double celebration, and I think it's very important for people to understand why March 25th was chosen as the day to start the revolution. It's a religious holiday, which Father Alex will speak on. And the date was chosen by the Filiki Eteria, or the secret society, basically, that was based in Odessa. And, of course, we know what's happening in the news with regards to Odessa. And Odessa at that time period was for the most part, Greek. So you had three people who formed a secret society, which expanded. And it had many members, the major members of Greek society, whether they were in the priesthood or the clergy, or whether they were archons, or whether they were what became some of the most famous fighters within the revolution. They chose that date because it was an important date. It was a religious date. And Father Alex, if you can, just explain what March 25th actually meant.
Well, to really understand the fullness of March 25th, you'd probably have to reflect on December the 25th, right? That is the birth of Jesus, the Savior of the world. And if you put 9 months earlier than December 25th, it's March 25th, and that's the Annunciation, the announcement to the entire world by the angel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary that she was going to behold the Savior. And the Jewish people at that time and throughout the ages have been waiting for the Messiah. So Jesus was the Messiah, that proclamation. Well, the Greeks at that time, as you pointed out, Alexandros Ypsilantis and others, chose this date because we were looking for the salvation of the Greek people, the Greek nation, their thirst for freedom. From the time of Marathon, from the time of Salamis, the Greeks always have fought for freedom. And if you're looking at the Ukraine, as I was listening to you, we're talking about Mariupol, and I was thinking about the 100,000 Greeks that live in the Ukraine, and what they're willing to fight for is their freedom to protect their families, their wives, their children, and the right to breathe free and to enjoy and celebrate democracy. So that's what they're doing again.
Thank you. And Peter, if you can, tell us a little bit about background from the fall of Constantinople in 1453 on May 29th to the revolution. In other words, what was taking place within that period in terms of slavery and all the rest of it?
Well, 1453, that was the end of the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire. And a few years later, in 1461, the last area of the Byzantine Empire, the Empire of Trebizond, also fell, 1461, to the Ottomans. And then we have 400 years of darkness, 400 years of oppression under the Ottoman yoke. Now, a few incidents, a few events took place unsuccessfully, though. And then comes March 25th, 1821. In 1828, we have the birth, the rebirth of Hellenism. And it was the first successful revolt for liberation after the American Revolution. It was the first successful revolution in the Ottoman Empire by all the other ethnic groups. And explicitly, it was a nationalistic movement which became a model for other movements to continue and also regain their freedom as well.
Thank you. Irakli, if you can, just elaborate on some of the issues around the revolution.
Yeah, it comes down to that fundamental human instinct, which is a yearning to be free. It's something that resonated with Europeans, something that resonated with folks in the United States because they saw themselves in the struggle for Greece's independence. They saw a people that were burdened, that were not represented in the government of the Ottoman Empire. They saw people who had a rich cultural history and, as was just stated, they were mired in 400 years of darkness. And in the spirit of enlightenment, the Philhellenism that was evident around the world, we know of the story of Lord Byron, the British poet. There was a sentiment of Philhellenism in the United States Congress as well. And it just came down to authoritarianism is not something that has a place in an enlightened society and in modern times. And obviously, it's not so modern for us today, but the ideas that the Greeks were trying to express, they found kindred spirits all over the world because that's always something we can identify with. We can identify with standing up to bullies. And the Greeks, as was stated again, it wasn't just 400 years and one day they woke up and wanted to be free. They tried many, many times to be free, and they were willing to die for causes that they believed in. And you have to remember that Greece was not a unified country, right? It was the Byzantine Empire, and then prior to that, empires of Athens, etc., but mostly city-states. And it was very much like they were fighting for a belief that had not yet existed. But for 400 years, and through the help of the church as well for keeping Hellenism alive, with Krυφά σχολεία, in caves and wherever they could retain their Hellenism, they rose up finally, and much like Ukraine is doing today, they've captivated the attention of the world because the Ukrainians, much like the Greeks, they had setbacks, but they fought for much, much longer than what people gave them credit for. So there's a lot of parallels.
Irakli, I'm glad you brought up America, because America, when it first became free, they also had to deal with the Ottoman Empire. In particular, they were being charged, and as a matter of fact, the American Treasury had to pay like 10 to 15% of its total treasury to the Barbary pirates. To the pirates. And basically America, the first war that America went into was the Barbary Wars. And they knew the Hellenic people at that time period because the first foreign warfare that took place in the shores of Tripoli, in the Battle of Darna. And they, in fact, knew who the Greeks were because, in fact, there were Greek mercenaries who fought with the American forces.
32 of them, they were in the Marines.
There were more Greeks fighting for the Americans in the Marines in that particular war. The first American battle, the first win, actually, in foreign soil. And the Song of the Marines, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, actually come from that particular battle. So they knew who they were. And obviously the Americans in particular, and let me go into this because this is very important with regards to America. When the war broke out in the Ottoman Empire, no nation in Europe supported the revolution of Greece. No nation in Europe supported it. And the reason why was because it was the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars that we talked about, Father Alex, and no one wanted to support any revolution of any kind. And in particular, they supported, actually, the Ottoman Empire versus the Hellenic Revolution.
Those are the classical underpinnings of the world. So therefore, in the United States, which lived that they struggled for their freedom in 1776 as Americans, which we've been very blessed to inherit. They went right back to Greece when they did the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, for example, his whole set of principles was built around Greek democracy. And when George Washington and Madison and Monroe, they came together and they created our Constitution and our way forward, it was based upon what Greece gave and what it gave to Rome and then Rome to the world. So therefore, they felt an immediate connection. And the revolution that brought about their freedom, they then said, why are we free and not those people in Greece who have suffered 400 years of slavery, that they have a right to be free? So the Phil-Hellenic were just an affirmation of the Hellenic in American fabric. It's part of the mindset of what America is. You go down to Washington, D.C. today, the major buildings are all Hellenic. They're all Greek. They're all based on those kinds of principles. And if you go to the different monuments, let's say where it is in the National Archives building, το παρελθόν εστί πρόλογος, the past is prologue. There is a definite connection, and that's, of course, that's what they celebrated. But I'd like you to tell that story about St. Nicholas, the Christmas celebration where the guy wrote about, he was an editor in a newspaper, and he wrote an article, and all of the money would go to Greece, something like that.
Well, there's no doubt that that particular point in time that we had the Philhellenic movement here. And by the way, everyone should know that that these Greek committees started actually in New York State, John. In other words, they started in New York State. They spread into Boston. They spread into Washington. They spread into Philadelphia. And it wasn't only men that were involved in this particular movement. It was also women. And the women themselves during that particular period were actually writing to the women in Greece, you know, and discussing their experiences and things of that nature. And there's no doubt that there was a deep connection, and it was a connection not only in the North but also in the South. Even though they had slavery in the South, for some reason they couldn't understand that freeing, let's say, the Greek people was the same as trying to free the Greek slaves.
Which eventually
happened. Because one of the things that we're here to discuss is obviously what effect the revolution had in Greece. But what we're also going to discuss today is how the revolution affected America itself. In other words, the Hellenic Revolution obviously was supported by the Philhellenes within the United States, not only to raise money and things of that nature, but they also sent fighters into Greece to fight in the War of Independence. For example, the first American who went to fight was George Jarvis. George Jarvis actually came into Greece in the early part of the revolution and went native.
Yeah,
in other words, he wore a fustanella. He became called Kapitan Zervas, and he actually fought in some of the major battles of Greece. African-American slave, James Williams.
Yeah.
He was a slave in Baltimore, went and fought in the Barbary Wars, then went into Greece, and again, fought and died in Greece. Jarvis also fought and died in Greece. So there was a connection, not only from the point of view of intellectual connection, financial connection, but there was also this spirit to help and fight and liberate Greece. This event is not, this particular day, this particular Independence Day is not only a Greek holiday. This is also an American holiday because the descendants of those people who were there, who helped the Greek people, actually themselves, their relatives who are now the ancestors of these people, fought in the revolution with us. So this is also an American holiday.
Well, that's why, if I may, Ronald Reagan, president in 1986, called it a celebration of Greek and American democracy.
Absolutely.
And from that time forward, the United States, the White House, celebrates that event because it's exactly what you're talking about. It was a connection of the spirit. You have the cradle of democracy, the champion of democracy. Those principles, fundamental rights, religious freedom, all of those things are very important to America, as we're seeing now playing throughout the world. Everybody's looking to the President of the United States, to the Congress, to give a sense of hope in the midst of this insanity going on in Ukraine, Russia, Europe. All what are they fighting for? The basic principles that were founded in Greece.
Exactly. And when the revolution was over, actually the revolution itself affected directly the American abolitionist movement.
That's true.
directly it affected it, and we'll go into the details of that in a second. Would you like to talk about a little bit about pre-revolution and the Enlightenment era, Rigas Ferreos, etc., and those people, those intellectuals who also helped spur the revolution of 1821?
Everything starts with a vision. Every movement, every revolution, every struggle for freedom, usually with one visionary. And in this case, we have Rigas Ferreos, who actually came with a vision of the rebirth of the Byzantine Empire. His vision was not to create a nationalistic state, as it eventually happened, but unfortunately, his dream didn't come true, and he was strangled, him and his, the people that were with him, trying to create this movement. That unfortunately, they didn't get to see a free Greece. That's number one. Number two is I want us, the audience, to know that contrary to public opinion, there was no country named Greece before 1828. There was no such a thing. And even today, if you look at the Greek passport, it says Hellenic Republic, the name of the country.
Well,
But the ethnicity is Greek. And let's take America for a second, regarding all those wonderful things that you said. America at the time was not considered a great power. And because of the Monroe Doctrine, which is the laissez-faire, unfortunately, they could not intervene or help Greece in any significant way.
well, we'll talk about the Monroe Doctrine in a second.
It was the Monroe Doctrine, that's what
Right.
We'll talk about it in a second, but the Monroe Doctrine, quite frankly, is always used as an excuse why America could not support Greece openly. But the reality, this is a separate issue. This is more, into the weeds,
Esoteric.
into the weeds, if you will. But part of actually, the American people wanted to support the revolution. As a matter of fact, the congressmen we're talking about actually openly supporting the revolution.
That's right.
Part of the reason why they didn't had to do with the mercantile interests within the Ottoman Empire. And that had to do in particular with the Brahmins in Boston. And it had to do, it sounds strange to everybody, but it had to do with the opium trade. In other words, what they would do is buy opium in Turkey and sell it into China for 4 times the amount. So there was such amount of wealth involved around the opium trade that basically they shut down. They shut down actually the Congress from actually having that discussion about openly supporting the revolution. As a matter of fact, the USS Constitution, which was supposed to be, again, neutral, all the rest of that, secretly came into the evening into Greece with supplies to support,
That's right.
support the Greeks
Well,
because
Lou,
they couldn't have it openly.
the Chinese are getting even with us now.
Yeah.
They are sending tons of fentanyl through
Exactly.
the Mexican markets to the Chinese cartel, and the Mexican cartel are partners, and they're sending all that fentanyl up to the United States. Last year, they killed 100,000 Americans.
John, that's absolutely correct. And
See how money goes and war follows, or war follows and money goes.
The Chinese are getting even. But Lou, I wanted to say something.
yes, please.
Lou, my great-grandfather from my mother's side was Constantinople and was involved in the patriarchy because my love for religion, I guess, of his blood. And my grandfather from my father's side ran the farms up in Odessa for the Russian czars. And maybe he was a member of that. And then also my grandfather had to. He was the Ottoman Empire considered him a terrorist, and in the middle of the night, they left Constantinople in 1911, 1912, and they went down to Nicetos, and that was their escape from Constantinople.
John, I'm really glad you brought up some of these regions. When we talk about Odessa, which is now in the Ukraine, when we talk about the Crimea, when we talk about Russia, many people don't understand also that among, in order to start a revolution, it's not only to have warriors, but you need money. And there were many wealthy Greek people in the Ottoman Empire itself. And there were many people in the diaspora. I'm talking about tens of thousands of people who actually lived in what is now the Ukraine, in Russia, in Romania, in all these countries in the Balkans that we're talking about. They themselves also, obviously, besides the intellectuals that we talked about earlier who supported the revolution, but the mercantile class also supported the revolution tremendously. Now, within what is being bombed right now, John, the areas that are being bombed savagely right now, there's at least 150,000
I said
Greeks
Mariupol, yeah.
in
That was their
Mariupol.
center.
Odessa,
That
which
was their Astoria.
exactly, Odessa, which they're looking to attack next, was also a Hellenic city because the Greeks also supported the Russians against the Ottoman Empire, and they were actually given most of the land of Odessa. The land of current Odessa in the late 1700s was given to the Greeks by the Russians because they supported them in eliminating the Ottomans from the Crimea area and also what is now part of the Ukraine, let's say in Odessa and all the rest of that. When you talk about Lviv right now, when you listen to the radio with regards to Lviv, which is on the western part of the Ukraine, the major houses and mansions that are in Lviv right now were of these Greek merchants. In Vienna, in Austria, where we were talking about earlier, about Rigas Fereos, again, there are Greek centers in there. There's a Greek street, and the oldest restaurant from the 1400s, 1500s in Vienna is the Greek restaurant in German.
Right next to the Greek Orthodox
Right.
Church, and that's
Wow.
where they used to
Yeah.
gather.
So can you expand on that, at least some of these connections that we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we brought up the, as John said, Odessa and Constantinople and the islands. It's so important that everybody understands that without the Greek diaspora, there would be no Greece.
Exactly.
Full stop. It's not enough to be a brute with a sword. You need intellectuals. You need warrior poets, as we had, as we said, Lord Byron and Rigas Fereos. These people they died, but were wizards with a pen. And even today, we see the diaspora and what it has done for Greece. Greece has, since the 1820s that we're talking about now, has just been reeling from one crisis to another, seemingly. Whether it's financial shortages, the wrong political folks in power, just getting it wrong in critical moments in their history. But the one constant has been the Hellenic diaspora. We are able to see things more objectively from afar, and that applies to many things in life. But the love that a person of the Greek diaspora possesses for Greece is one of selflessness and of pure love. There's no rational reason why some in the diaspora have another branch of their business or in Greece, or maybe they go back to the village of their papu or their yaya and they fix up the home there, knowing that they might only spend a week there, tops, a year. When you look at it rationally, it doesn't make sense. But the irrational love that Greeks in the diaspora have for the country is one of the things that has sustained Greece all this time. And that was way before the modern Greek state existed. As you said, in Odessa, you had a Kapodistrias later on who literally wrote the Constitution of Switzerland. He was the first governor of Greece a little after this period, and we are indebted to the Greeks of the diaspora who, with the Filiki Eteria, were able to combine the sword, the pen, and the purse to make sure that Greeks could be free. And like as you said earlier, on the Greek passport, the Hellenic Republic, well, the Greek parliament today is Vouli ton Elinon, the parliament of the Greeks, not of the Greeks that live, of the Hellenes, not the ones that just live in the borders of the territory of Greece, but for all of us as Hellenes.
Yeah, I think, I'll get to you in 1 second, Peter. For the audience, just so they understand, most Greek people or Hellenic people lived outside of what we know today as Greece until the 1920s. In other words, there were more Greeks outside of what is now Greece than within Greece until the 20s and the exchange of the population. Peter, you want to discuss the
As a
diaspora?
segue to all those wonderful places that you mentioned, Constantinople and Odessa, allow me to speak about my own special roots from Pontus,
Pontus.
from Trebizond. And as a matter of fact, two of the most, I would say, significant figures of the Greek Revolution of March 25th are both from that area. I'm talking about the brothers Ypsilandi, Alexandros Ypsilandis, historically, and Dimitrios Ypsilandis. Historically speaking, if you want to be historically accurate, the revolution started in Iasion, which is today in Romania, by Alexandros Ypsilandis with a small group of brave, mostly students from the university, but unfortunately they were not well prepared. And for many other reasons, he didn't get the support. He didn't get the local support. He didn't get the expected support that he was going to get from Russia. His army was defeated. But that was the first movement. That was the first battle. And then he was imprisoned. Eventually, he died also in Austria as well. But his brother, Dimitrios, he went to Peloponnese, to the Peloponnese. He took over the Greek army, the Greek revolutionary army until the end. So this is very ironic. It's one brother started the revolution, and the other brother completed.
In all fairness, because I know within Hellenic history that people bring up certain people, but there was one person who actually declared the revolution from the Philiki Eteria, and that was a man by the name of Panagiotis Sekeris. When around 1820s, there was only one leader of the Philiki Eteria. It wasn't the three original that they talked about. And Panagiotis Sekeris, if it wasn't for him actually, because he was a merchant, he was very wealthy, he actually supported financially the Philiki Eteria. No one knew who he was because it was a secret society. And he declared the revolution. I want to go back to Kapodistrias, because Kapodistrias, I'm not sure if it was quite understood what was being said, but Kapodistrias was the foreign minister of Russia. The foreign minister of Russia. He was one of the most brilliant people of that particular period. And he, in fact, created, as you said, the Constitution of Switzerland, which is still operative today. Still operative today. We should know that, and you should know that the revolution, prior to the revolution, there was the Napoleonic Wars, and it was during that period also that the Hellenic Navy in particular built itself up, because the merchants of the Ottoman Empire, who were basically Hellenic people, Armenian people, and Jewish people, the Greek people in particular, they were people of the sea. So it was during that period that they built actually huge merchant marine fleets, because they were supplying ammunition and supplies not only to the French, but also to the British.
I'm like John. I look at the Greeks today, what's going on in the world, and you still see them being maritime leaders.
Yes.
They're on the seas. They're the ones that are supplying the world in the middle of this Ukraine crisis. It is the Greek ships that are there. But I think it's very important, as we're talking about 1821, what does that impact to us in 2022, right?
We got a
For
big
example,
problem. We got a big problem in 2022, Father.
That's
Ellis.
right.
We have a brain drain in Greece, and if we don't get the Greeks back to Greece with opportunities in Greece, Greece has a problem. They have Brexit. What was the purpose of Brexit? The purpose of Brexit was they wanted England and the United Kingdom was being taken over by the outside world. And the Brits made a decision. You know what the decision is?
To keep
the
our
decision,
culture.
We want to keep our culture. We want to keep Britain, and we want to keep England. And they blocked. The Brexit was, the purpose was to block the invasion of Great Britain by foreign entities.
They want to make sure that they retain their democracies, their institutions.
So what's going to happen to Greece? We got the brain drain, number one. Number two, we have the problem of Greece is being taken over by foreign countries.
Well, the good thing is, John, though, that because of we talked about the diaspora, there's been a strong resurgence now of people investing on Greece. Jamie Dimon, the big thing for what happened with J.P. Morgan Chase. So Greece is moving in a very positive direction. I think with Kyriakos Mitsotakis has done a very good job. And under his leadership, I think that he's reached out. And, look at what Greece did. We're talking about Greeks, the Greek Jews who suffered Thessaloniki, what they suffered under the Nazis. We, as a country at that time, again fighting for freedom that goes back to 1821, that goes back to Salamis, that goes back to Marathon. Freedom has always been in our blood. But look at when we're going through this COVID crisis. All of a sudden, Pfizer comes up with whom? Albert Bourla, a Greek-American Jew. How proud can we be of our culture going and transcending time and space? And I want to say something about my good friend John over here. When we talk about Greece, when you talk about the United States, 1770s, we had the 13 colonies. We're now 50 states. So we see America as a developer 200 years. Greece, as was well pointed out, was a city-state. And city-states started coming together. John was, like he likes to say, he was conceived as an Italian and he was born as a Greek. Nisiros, when did Nisiros come in finally to be part of the Greek nation?
Well, after the war, yeah.
That's right. So you see, there's an ongoing development, an ongoing revolution that has to be addressed here. And since we're talking about that, I want to bring up something that's very important. With Greek Independence Day, the bicentennial of the Greek people, why is part of our soul still locked up and enslaved at the British Museum? Bring back the Parthenon marbles. We have a right to be free.
Yes.
And let's
that
get
belongs.
Princeton University to give back what they owe us.
Yeah, Princeton University, for example,
That's right.
during World War I, the fascist Bulgarian
Accepted stolen merchandise.
they stole manuscripts, and then you have Princeton University, who speaks about freedom and truth and gospel reality, because as you well know, Princeton was founded as a Presbyterian seminary. They refused to give back our manuscripts. And they write in their own catalogs that these manuscripts were stolen from the Greek monasteries, and yet they refused to give them back. Princeton University. But the point is, I was talking about the Parthenon marbles, but I'm glad John brought that up.
No, let's discuss that for a second,
Yeah.
because what many people don't know is during the Ottoman Empire period, before the revolution, they would do these grand tours that the wealthy people would go into Greece, etc., like Lord Elgin and other people, and they would take all these artifacts. So they took, obviously, what we call the Elgin marbles. They brought it back to England. But there's other things that they took. During the same type of period, they also took the metopes from the temple of Vasi, which is the second most well-preserved temple in all of Greece.
Yeah.
And they're also in the British Museum.
Yeah.
We talk about bringing back the marbles of the Acropolis. What about the temple of Vasi, okay, which is in the Peloponnesus?
Yeah, well, that's one of the concerns that the British Museum has. But we're saying right now, there's been an official request for the first time from the Greek government, prime minister to prime minister, to Boris Johnson. Right. Boris Johnson, who, when he was a student at Oxford, used to picket the British Museum, saying we have to have those marbles back.
He has a famous picture with Melina Mercouri.
And I'm so glad that you're doing the Greek Independence Day. When is it? In June 5th?
June the 5th, the Greek Independence Day.
The number one issue should be
and
the
John is the
bicentennial.
chairman. And John is the chairman.
Yeah. We should be having a float, bring back the Parthenon marbles.
Very true.
They belong back in Greece. We are incomplete until those marbles are back on the Parthenon for the people who created and gave democracy to the world. Enough is enough.
Can we make it the theme for this year, John? Can we make this what Father Alex said to be the theme for this year's parade?
No, there's many themes of this year's parade. Let me bring up some of the themes, because these become very important. The 200th anniversary, which we never celebrated, obviously. The 100th anniversary of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese.
And a HEPA.
The 100th anniversary of a HEPA. the 100th anniversary of the burning of Smyrna, which
Yeah.
was the last genocide episode of the 30-year genocide from 1894 to 1924. Very important, by the way, for
And
the
Hitler
100 years.
said what happened to the Armenians and the Greeks and the Syro-Chaldeans.
Exactly. And the 2500th anniversary of the Battle of Thermopylae, the Battle of the 300, the Battle of Salamis, and the Battle of Plataea. Okay? In addition, we should not forget...
Congratulations, Lou. You're deputy chairman of the parade.
John, because I know we don't have a lot of time, because we could talk for hours, but I'm glad you guys brought us into the
Well, we belong in the
21st century.
Let me tell you, that's what John does. I agree
Let me
with
tell
him.
you, John, what one of my largest concerns are, in particular...
You're a historian.
In particular, what's happening in the Ukraine right now, which is triggering other issues with regards to Taiwan, which is triggering a lot of issues, including, in my opinion, what's happening in the East Mediterranean. And that has to do with 2023, which is the 100th anniversary of the Republic of Turkey. We haven't mentioned it, basically, but John, what's happening and what's been happening, the so-called Finlandization, that's of the terminology of Greece, where in fact airplanes from Turkey have been going into Hellenic water, Hellenic airways and Hellenic seaways thousands of times. People discussing openly, John, Erdogan discussing openly that the islands belong to him. The islands that you were talking about, some of the islands that are Greek
That's
islands.
where he was born.
So the concern and the revolution that we're talking about from 1821 is also into the modern days. Cyprus has been taken over.
Turkey took northern Cyprus, and nobody said boo. One NATO country using NATO weapons taking over another NATO country, and why didn't the United States say anything? Why did the NATO countries didn't say anything? They
And if
took
you
over
remember-
half of Cyprus.
And if you remember, there was a Turkish embargo, and it did happen in 1974. 75, I believe the Turkish embargo took effect by the United States Congress. And then it was Jimmy Carter who ultimately lifted that embargo, because the United States did react because of the Greek diaspora at that set and said, where is justice, the rule of law? John Bradmus, Paul Sarbanes, Ben Rosenthal. Those are your friends that you introduced me to. These are the kinds of people that spoke up, the diaspora, because we spoke about the diaspora
But
earlier.
we didn't do anything about it. There could be another revolution going on in America that we don't know about, because our legal system is under attack, our education system is under attack, our borders are under attack, our whole energy policy is under attack. The United States of America is under attack by forces unknown. Is it Chinese money? Is it Russian money? Who is attacking? It's not happening by itself.
I think what John's referring to are
Catsimatidis.
fundamental principles. If you move away from them, then you undermine fundamental institutions. Then if you undermine fundamental institutions, you undermine the fundamental freedoms of America. That's what John's talking about. And you can see that there are certain things going on in our society. Why this hatred from the right and the left?
The hatred of religion.
Yeah.
Why the hatred of religion by the Democratic Party? I mean, I don't understand that. And
Well, I know that-
African Americans in America, the Latin people, the Spanish people in America love their
They're religious.
religions.
They're religious people.
And they're finally turning against the Democratic Party
But
because
not
of the hate.
everybody in the Democratic Party.
Well, but a large percentage, the people in the Democratic Party that have common sense, I urge them to stand up and say enough is enough. Stop attacking religion.
Oh, I agree with you. First of all, I better agree with you. I'm going to be out of a job. So
I will say this. I will say that the fundamentals.
That's a joke, by the way.
John, I will say this. The fundamentals of the American Revolution, what people fought for, their freedom, is exactly the fundamentals that were taking place in Greece in 1821.
well, we can't take them for granted. That's what John said.
Exactly, and John is absolutely
Now,
correct.
there's one more thing I'm concerned about, Lou.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about that Greece remains Greek. And we don't allow, and I think the Prime Minister Mitsotakis should have addressed that we don't allow so much foreign influence and people coming in and taking over Greece. I'm speaking for my forefathers. They fought and died. And guess what? We want Greece to remain Greek. They have the right to remain Greek and not be invaded by outside sources.
I think Greece is at a seminal moment here.
Can I say something
Please.
quickly? Regarding Turkey, all of us have been to Turkey quite a few times. And I believe, that's my opinion, that most of the Turkish people are very friendly to Greeks.
95% of them.
It's
Yes,
not,
you
it's
know,
not,
let
it's
me
not the
finish.
people, it never
Yes.
is. It's
So-
never the
Just
people.
like the
So-
Russians love the Ukrainians.
So
but
every time we go there, and Father Alex can attest to that, and everybody on the panel, that we get the best of treatment. Everywhere we go, and we say that we're Greek, they give us the red carpet
the
treatment.
American dollar is king.
But
Yeah,
but
I
we
agree
have
with you
a
there.
lot of things. Yeah, we do have a different religion, but we have so many similar cultural things.
Peter,
I see
Peter,
when
Peter,
Turkish
Peter,
people come to Greece,
we
they
agree.
feel that they're at home. So if they have a different leadership, a different government, which is more friendly to Greece, we can live together. We can support each
Peter,
other
Peter.
economically, financially.
Peter, we all agree, but
and
right
culturally-
this second, their leadership wants the Hellenic Islands.
Yes, we
We
know
totally agree that the people are not the issue.
And there's
The
a
politicians
secret.
are the
There's a
issue.
secret that I talked about this morning on the morning show. Bernie had said, you know what the secret is? Between the Dodecanese Islands along the Turkish coast and Cyprus along the Israeli coast and Turkish coast, you have $1 trillion worth of oil and minerals. $1 trillion. And guess there's going to be a fight for that.
Eraklis, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I think that Greece is finally at a stage 201 years after the start of the struggle for independence where Greeks are kind of what John was saying. They are kind of fed up with being volleyball being passed around to great powers. I think that Prime Minister Mitsotakis formally requesting from Prime Minister Boris Johnson for the return of the Parthenon marbles was another sign of that. I think that Greeks are starting to understand that whether it be Russia, whether it be China, whether it be the United States, if you really want to be in command of your own destiny, you have to be the one doing that. It can't be somebody else at the steering wheel. So Greece is now starting to understand, after 2 centuries, the value of keeping the diaspora close, which is why they've amended the laws to allow, in some measure, for Greeks in the diaspora to vote in national elections in Greece. Because for a long time, going back to the American Revolution, they were asking us to pay taxes with no representation in Hellenic Parliament. That is a familiar theme for the Americans out there, taxation without representation. But Greeks are now starting to find their voice. They're finally starting to stand up and say, you know what, why are so many wings of the Louvre and the British Museum filled with our treasures? Why was the Rosetta Stone taken out of Egypt? What are we doing here? So I think that folks, my age, who by default, my parents both were born and raised in Greece, they immigrated to the United States, and that was just something that was accepted, that if you wanted to do anything of substance in your life the right way, that you'd go to a country like the United States, like Canada, Australia, etc., and work your tail off and live the American dream here. And I think that Greeks are now starting to understand that if we take our destiny in our own hands, perhaps we won't have to leave. Maybe we can build something here. And more importantly, bring, as John was saying with the brain drain, bring some of that talent back. Because, to be honest, if Greece worked as a society, as a country, even at a 30% clip, I promise you that there would not be a Greek diaspora. Why would anybody in their right minds want to leave Greece if not for external factors that give them no choice? The weather's perfect, the food's phenomenal, the cultural history is second to none. We're all here for a reason. We wanted, our forefathers wanted a better future for our families, and they've achieved that. And now I think we've reached a moment in Greek history where Greeks are starting to understand, you know what, maybe we don't have to leave. Maybe we don't have to leave. Maybe we can build it right here. So I think that in the spirit of the Greek independence, where they wanted a self-determination, I think 2 centuries on, we're finally seeing the fruits of that labor.
But I agree with John's point also. Obviously we want our freedoms and all the rest of that, but right now, there's foreign influences that have been coming in, buying all the ports, for example, within Greece and in Europe, and using Greece to a certain degree as a beachhead into the EU. And those foreign influences, the financial influences, John, weigh very heavily on the Hellenic people
And
right
when
now.
China does
China,
it.
Russia, that's right.
They have a program. You know what it used to be called from Brooklyn, the docks, loan to own. Even
Loan
if
to
they
own.
loan money to Greece, they loan it they know that the Greeks will default and they're going to end up owning it.
Yeah, in terms of
John's right.
Yeah,
The
well,
new Silk Road.
No, John's correct. But in terms of default, don't forget what happened in World War II, where the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars were actually stolen from Greece. And quite frankly, if Germany gave back the money that they took from that particular period, I don't think there would be an issue with the finances in Greece.
That's true. Anyway, but I'd like to go to, because we all grew up under Archbishop Iakovos
Yes,
in many
absolutely.
ways. And I was thinking of when we talked about Ahepa, that when the Greeks first came to this country, as many of the immigrants to this country, they were kind of persecuted. They were not wanted. In Omaha, I think they
burned down the stores.
hung, but they hung 8 Greeks from the trees. But Archbishop Iakovos, I had an opportunity to work with him for many years, and of course he marched at Selma.
Of course.
And he was the highest-ranking religious leader at the time. So I had John was there, I had the privilege of driving Coretta Scott King. I picked her up at the airport. She came in the celebration of Archbishop Iakovos' 20th anniversary, and we were in a room with Theodore Hesburgh, the great president of Notre Dame, at that time David Hartman, Governor Mario Cuomo, and we were discussing Archbishop Iakovos' role with Coretta Scott King. And so Theodore Hesburgh, Father Hesburgh, asked Archbishop Iakovos, he says, what made you go to Selma? You were the highest-ranking religious leader, but what moved you for that? And Archbishop Iakovos said, I was born a slave. I was born in Turkey. My conscience would not let me rest. So when my brother, Dr. King, called me, I had to speak out for freedom. And that's what I started out, as we all started out. What was the revolution about? What is the revolution going about in Ukraine? Self-determination, freedom, democracy. When John was talking about principles in the United States or the Brexit, going back to one thing, keep our fundamentals, freedoms strong. And unless we're vigilant, we're going to lose them. Freedom is not free.
Exactly.
We see it with our own great military, and they put their lives and their limbs on the world. We should thank God for those people that are preserving our right to do this broadcast, WABC Radio in New York, because we have a great military that puts their lives every day on the line for us. So we've got to think about, yes, our heroes of the past, but our heroes of today, and we should not take those things for granted. And I think that's one of John's. But I want to thank WABC for giving this opportunity to celebrate, yes, 1821, but we will always carry that on our hearts because we want to be free.
God bless Greece and God bless America.
Ready to go, John?
All set?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well done.